Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to part 7 to our mobile RPG series. This series is sponsored by my Kickstarter course. It's a Godot Kickstarter course. You can find a link to that in the description, and there will be a card in the video. Let's get started. So last time we set up we spent some time setting up our different sword actions so that they wouldn't be quite as coupled to the battle object up here. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because I kind of mentioned earlier that this really wasn't a good solution where we're getting access to the player and the enemy like this. And so I want to talk a little bit about coupling. So in your project, you want to try and reduce coupling as much as you can. And coupling is basically when one part of your code relies on another part of your code. And so you can see this right here. This code right here relies on us accessing the player and the enemy nodes. And there's no way you can remove all of the coupling in your projects because obviously certain areas of your game have to communicate with other areas of your game. But you want to try and keep your scenes as decoupled as possible. So and one of the ways you can check to see how much coupling you have is if you open up your scene like the sword button right here. If I run this scene on its own and I don't get any error messages and I click on the sword and I still don't get any error messages, then it's probably not super coupled. Because if you're running an individual scene and it's not working on its own, then you've got some problems there. So let's try running the enemy here and see. We don't seem to have any errors right there. So that's a really good first way of kind of checking to see if your game has very high coupling in it. Or if your scenes are self-contained. Like the scene itself can run on its own. You could put it inside of anything and it would be fine there. So see, that was part of the problem with our earlier sword button, is that it was connected to the battle scene and coupled to it. And it wasn't its own scene at the time. It was just a node. So we kind of got away with it for that because you couldn't run that node. It wasn't its own scene, but it wouldn't really have worked the way that we had set it up. And signals are actually a pretty good way for nodes to talk to each other, because certain things are higher coupling than others, and certain things are lower coupling. Now, if our sword action button right here, for example, we're currently using find node, which is a signal that will, a function that will attempt to find that node, and then if it can't, it's just like, well, I couldn't find it, so no big deal, right? But if we were using get node like this, if we run the game normally, it's going to work, but if we run this scene on its own, it's going to break and we're going to get errors. And the reason is because get node is like, that node's not there. I couldn't find it. And so I have a solution to this problem, and I'm honestly not sure whether it's like the best solution out there, but it feels like a better solution. So let's actually bring up an image here. So let's kind of visually show what coupling looks like, right? So you've got some different objects in your game, some different scenes, you could say, and some of them need to talk to each other. So maybe these two need to talk with each other. So you have a signal like this, and maybe this one right here needs to talk with it, and there you go. And you've got a few things that are talking with each other, right? This looks like a game with low coupling. But what if you have a game that, looks like this? Where everything is talking with everything else. It gets really, really ugly, right? And by talking with, sometimes I mean accessing directly. So, this object needs access to the player, and everything's accessing the player, right? Everything is touching the player. And this is really bad. You want to try and avoid this as much as you can. And that seems quite obvious, right? But let's go back to our game with low coupling. So let's say a lot of things need access to the player, because in a lot of games that's true, right? Stuff needs access to the player. So let's say this is our player right here. We'll just put a big P on this one for player. So a lot of stuff needs access to it. Well, I have a solution. Well, one solution you could do is you could create a global singleton variable that accesses the player directly. And then everything else in your game would have access to that global singleton, right? And the reason this is, there are some benefits to this solution. Like, first of all, let's say you change where your player is located or change the name of your player, right? Let's just remove this for now. Then you only have to change that direct access one time right here. You only have to change this. And then everything else just accesses the reference to that inside of the global singleton. But the problem with this system is that it's a global singleton. And singletons they're global. Everything has access to it. And not everything needs access to it. A lot of things in your game might need access to the player, but everything doesn't, right? Everything doesn't need access to the player, and that's the problem with global singletons like this. However, let's say that this object right here, this one, and this one, and this one all need access to the player, but the other ones don't, right? Well, instead of creating a global singleton, we could create a resource or a scriptable object. And that resource would have access to the player. It would have a reference to the player. We could then choose which scenes inside of our game needed access to the player and give only those scenes access to that resource right here. And in their script, they would actually load the resource at the start, at the very top of their script. So you could, whenever you open up a script, you could immediately see what that script had access to. Like, oh, it has access to the battle units resource, which would include maybe the player and the enemy. And this is what we're actually going to do. And like I said, I don't know if this is the best solution, but I think it's a good solution. And if you guys have different alternatives to how to solve this problem, I'd love to hear them in the comments. So let's get started. Let's set this back to find node for now, and this back to find node. So we're going to create a new script. Oops. I want to clear the error messages here. We're going to create a new script. So let's come on script, file, new script. And this is going to inherit from resource. Like that. And we're going to call this script battle units. Like that. Now, inheriting from resource, this is kind of like extending Godot in a way. We're kind of almost adding new functionality to the engine, almost like an add-on or a plugin or something, because we're going to be adding a new resource type. Because if you right-click over here and do create new resource, there's lots of resources you can create, right? Scripts, textures, fonts, style boxes, alt themes, the stuff that we've done over here. We're going to be adding our own custom resource now. We get to decide what it's called, and the way you do that is with class name. So this resource will be called battle units. Okay? And this resource is going to have a few variables. It's going to have a player, and it's going to have an enemy. And we're going to set both of these variables to null. And we'll save. Okay, so this right here, this didn't create a resource though, it created a script. And this script, because of the class name right here, this script is what tells Godot that we want to add a new resource to the game. So we can save, and we can now come over here and right click and do new resource. And if we type in battle units, you can see our new resource type, and we can create it. And we'll call it battle units.tres. Save. And now we have this resource down here. We have the script that allows us to create this resource, and then we have the resource that we just created. Now, the first thing we need to do is make sure that the resource has access to the player and the enemy, so it's got a reference. And the way that we do that is by having the player and the enemy directly give the resource access. So first, let's come into player stats, and up at the top, we'll do const battle units equals preload battle, let's see. TRES. Let's hope that works. Okay. And then we'll have down here, after our setters, we'll have func ready underscore ready battle units dot player equals self. So we're giving the battle units access to us. However, we want to make sure and remove that access if we're removed. So func exit tree battle units dot player equals null. So if this node exits the tree, then we'll remove that access. So if we have our diagram here again, we've got our player right here, and we've got our resource right here. When the player is added to the scene, we connect up with resource and we tell it how to get access to us. But then if we are removed from the scene, we remove the access. That's what we're doing. We'll do the same thing with enemy. And I'm just going to copy this. Come into enemy. And then we can say, after our setters and getters, underscore ready battle units dot enemy equals self under exit tree battle units dot enemy equals null. There we go. Save. Now we've connected our player object and our enemy object, or node, I should say, or scene, whatever, to our resource. Now we want to give access to, we want to give access to the resource to other things. One of those other things is actually the enemy. Well, the enemy already has access. You can see up here, we've already got access to the battle units resource. So now, when we're dealing our attack, we no longer have to get the player the way that we did. So if we come down, before we had all this target nonsense going on, we can remove this, remove this, and instead of doing self.target, we can just do player. Why did I call it player? It should be player stats. let's just fix that. So we'll come into battle units, player stats. Maybe I should just called it player because I've been doing player the whole time. Let's teach that. If you do Control Shift, let's see, Control Shift F, you can find player stats. And we can replace this. Yeah, we got a lot of locations where we're doing player stats. You could do find replace, and that's how you would do it, Control Shift F. But let's actually not do it. It's too much work. Let's fix this one. Control Shift F. Let's fix player. Except we want to do whole words. Player. Right here, we'll just change this to player stats and this to player stats. There we go. Okay. Clear this. So all we did was come into the player stats.gd and replace battle units player with player stats. And we also did it in the actual battle units.gd. So now our enemy will have player stats. It will have battle units dot player stats dot HP minus equals 4. But you don't need to, because there's no way to destroy player stats. But you could have a check to make sure that it's not null before doing that. So there we go. The enemy now just targets that directly. We'll need to change attack here, because attack, this is one of the areas where we have coupling, right? If you come into our battle, we're calling attack on enemy like this. And we can remove that like that. And I think we're going to want to give battle access to the battle units as well. So const battle units equals preload battle units.tres. And then we can say var enemy equals battle units.enemy. And we can say var player stats equals battle units.player stats. And then we can get rid of these direct accesses right here. It doesn't really matter as much for the player stats, but for the enemy it matters, because we're going to want to be doing, we can get rid of that now. We're going to want to be doing different, we're going to want to be able to have different enemies. And if we access the enemy directly up here, then we're going to have to update that access each time we add a new enemy, which technically we'll be doing that with battle units, but with battle units, it's going to do it automatically. It'll be inherited now, whereas we would have to do it manually if we were to do it this old way. So I don't feel like I explained that very well, but basically the new enemies that we create will inherit from this enemy scene, which means they will automatically update the battle unit enemy when they're created and when they leave the scene. So this only allows for one enemy at a time, but that's what our game is designed to do. And I've actually used this same system with a scriptable object like this, or a resource, for having multiple enemies as well. It just has to be modified. But this game only needs one enemy, so we're going to make the system work that way. So once we have access like that, we can then So we've given a couple things access right now. If you look at our thing here, we also have battle, which now has access to this as well. So it has access to the player and the enemy. There's one other thing that needs access in our game, and that is our action buttons. So if you come into the action button.gd, we want the base one, action button.gd. We can do const battle units equals preload battle units dot tres. And then we can just save. And then we come into sword, our sword action button. And right here, instead of trying to find these, we can say battle units dot enemy and battle units dot player stats. So then we get access this way. And that's the only one I think we need right there. Then we come into our heal action. And once again here, instead of using main.findNode, we can do battle units dot player stats. And we don't need to get access to main anymore right here. And we also don't need to get, inside of our sort action button, we also don't need to get access to main anymore right here. We do need it down here though, but this is not a bad way of getting access to main right there. So then now our this is battle, BTTLE battle. This one over here will be action buttons, which we'll just do AB. Now they have access to them as well. However, once again, if we need to change these in any way, we only change it in this one spot, and then everything else still accesses it directly. And there we go. Everything should still work the way that it was set up before. Oops, I accidentally double clicked on it. So I didn't get a heal there. But that's going to be it. In the next video, we're going to be creating some new enemies, some different enemies to add to the game. And thank you all so much for watching this video. Hopefully you learned something. And let me know in the comments if you have any other ideas for how to solve this problem in Godot, any better ways that you might go about it. And I will talk to you all later.